So this is our next installment of A Tale Dark and Grim. Here we go. So the last time we were reading, Gretel was at that tavern and they heard about the dragon in the Kingdom of Grimm. And so she decided she's going to go back home. She's going to go back to the castle. Okay, so she's left the tavern now. Hansel traveled down the wet, icy road, a solitary boy with charcoal eyes and curly black hair laden with flakes of snow. Behind him followed two obedient oxen, pulling two positively enormous carts. The first cart was filled with golden apples, 1,000 of them, firm and round and cool. Golden as in made of gold. Of course, not golden delicious, golden expensive. The second cart was filled with barrels of wine, barrels stacked so high that they tottered and creaked with ever turning in the wheel. There was enough wine in those barrels to keep a whole village in drink for a year. The apple and the wine and the carts and the oxen were all gifts from 2 villages, of course. You see, after burying Johansen and making a little headstone for him, faithful was all it said, Hansel had gone to the village of the golden apples where he told them of the mouse gnawing at the roots of their tree. They killed it, and the apples began to grow immediately, and so they gave him a gift of the 1,000 golden apples and the cart and the quiet, obedient, incredibly large ox. Next he had gone to the village of the wine, where he told them of the frog stopping up their fountain. Once they killed it, the wine began to flow again, and they gave Hansel a gift of the barrels of wine, the cart, and another quiet, obedient, incredibly large ox. He named the oxen Ivy and Betty, which is strange because oxen are boys. So Hansel, having bested the devil and saved the 2 villages, and now leading a fortune in wine and gold, set out for the Kingdom of Grimm. It wasn't hard to get directions either. Everyone could point you to a kingdom where a dragon was. But Hansel's progress was slow, for he stopped at every village, every hamlet, every house and hovel he passed along the way to ask if they had heard or seen anything of his sister Gretel. But no one had. "You mean Gretel, the old woman?" "No, my sister." "Gretel, my sister's baby?" "No, my sister, and she's not a baby." "I have a goat named Gretel." "No, not her." He may have a fortune in gold and wine behind him, and 2 obedient oxen to follow him wherever he went, but Hansel's heart was as black and heavy as it ever been, and his feet dragged in the mud and ice. Without a sister, he did not want to go home, or face a dragon, or face his parents. Gretel stood at the door of the tavern staring down the road. Coming towards her were 2 enormous ox carts, each capped like miniature mountains with snow. Walking out in front of them was someone with dark hair, a small, dejected someone whose feet dragged as he walked. There was something about the someone that made Gretel want to wait for him. As the carts drew near, her heart caught in her throat. With her fine, ocean-blue eyes, Gretel could now make out the someone's face, and she cried aloud and tore off for him down the road. As Hansel drew closer to the kingdom, he seemed to see Gretel everywhere, in bakeries and upstairs windows, going into and out of houses, which resulted in some pretty embarrassing moments, as you can imagine. Just up ahead, there was a girl standing at the doorway of a tavern, and, had he not known he was just seeing things, he would have sworn that that girl was Gretel. Then the girl was no longer standing at the door of the tavern. She was sprinting towards him, her long blonde hair flying out behind her. Hansel blinked. He stopped dragging his feet. He ran. Hansel and Gretel came towards each other like 2 magnets meeting, like meteors that had been screaming through space towards him, one moment of collision. They met in the middle with a bang, and instantly their feet went out from under them on the slick roadway. They landed hard in a puddle of icy mud. They stared at each other, sitting in the puddle, lost and then found, dead and then alive, covered in mud. Sitting on their behinds in 3 inches of filthy water. And they began to laugh. They threw their arms around each other and laughed until their tears streamed down their faces, and they sat freezing, muddy, in a puddle in the middle of the road with the gray sky overhead and their parents' castle waiting just a few miles away, and they sat there and held each other until their arms ached. "Where have you been?" Hansel asked as they pulled themselves out of the puddle. "How are you alive?" Gretel asked at just the same moment. So they climbed up on the ox cart and told each other about every single thing that had happened since the day of the hunt in the Liebenwald, and some things they told about twice. And as they talked and laughed and gasped and talked some more, Ivy and Betty drew them closer and closer to home. Hansel and Gretel coming to the hardest part now. It's true, they've been nearly eaten by a cannibalistic baker woman, and they've talked to a fiery sun and to the child-eating moon and the kind stars, and they've journeyed to the crystal mountain, and Gretel cut off her own finger and caused someone to be boiled alive, and Hansel had been turned into a beast and been shot and skinned and gambled away, and then he went to hell and dressed up like the devil's grandmother, and that been chased by the devil himself, and it had to hold hands with the man who was dying. It's true they've done all these things, but sometimes coming home is the hardest thing of all. Soon, Hansel and Gretel found themselves in the heart of the kingdom of Grimm, driving through towns that still lived in their earliest memories. As they looked around, their stomachs began to twist into knots. Some of the towns looked just like they remembered them, as if memories of home could be modeled in wood and brick. But other towns, other memories of home, had been razed to the ground. Houses were torn apart, and the roofs and walls scattered and broken. Shops were burned, eviscerated, empty. Dead animals lay in the street, their bloated bellies stiffening as flies walked carefully across the surface of their eyeballs. "The dragon," Gretel murmured. Hansel nodded and stared. As they passed through one gutted town, the door on the wreckage of the house began to move. Its hinges groaned angrily. Hansel leaned close to Gretel. She took his hand. Then from the darkness, a head emerged. It was a child. He was very small, the size of a child Gretel had seen in the tavern. He was followed by an older child, a girl, and then a still older girl. "Come out," the eldest said. "Look." From behind them emerged their parents. The whole family was dirty, emaciated, with ragged clothes and frightening eyes. Gretel said, "This is not good." "No," Hansel said, "it is not." Suddenly Gretel jumped down from the cart and ran around to the back. "I'm going to give them an apple," she shouted to Hansel. The family heard this, and the father and the mother and the 3 children came out to the cart. "You have apples," the father said. "Not the kind you eat," Gretel told him, "but this may help you." And she reached under the canvas tarp and took out an apple and gave it to them. "It's gold," the children cried, and the parents' eyes grew wide with wonder. But the eldest of the children, who was a few years older than Gretel, stared at her. "She looks like the princess," the girl said. The family stopped, marveling at the apple, and looked at Gretel and said, "She does," the father said, and then tentatively he bowed and said, "Your Highness?" And Gretel blushed. The eldest child had run around to the front of the cart. "And the prince!" she shouted. All the rest of their journey home, the family ran ahead of the ox cart, cheering and shouting for all to hear. "The prince and princess are home! The prince and princess are home!" People began to come out of their houses, slowly at first, peering fearfully around their doors. But when they saw the 2 children sitting atop the ox cart and the family walking before them, shouting at the top of their lungs, the villagers' frightened faces gradually lifted, and they came out into the warming sun to walk behind the ox cart and cheer. Soon Hansel and Gretel had a trail of followers, 1,000 people strong, and still they gathered more as they went. They looked around them at the cheering, shouting, laughing people. Never had they felt so special, so important. They were just children after all. Word of their arrival ran ahead of them. It did not take long for it to reach the king and the queen of the castle. At first, neither king nor queen believed it. There had been rumors of their children return before. But as the reports were confirmed and confirmed again, and then again, king and queen, father and mother, grew too agitated to wait any longer. They rushed to the great gate of the castle with pounding hearts and clasping hands. As the castle came into view, with its tall turrets and broad porticos, Gretel took her brother's arm. She held it so tight it began to hurt, and he looked at her. Her face was lined with worry. "You don't think," she stopped to begin again, "they won't do what they did again, will they?" Slowly, Hansel shook his head. "No," he said. And as he repeated all faithful Johannes had told him, "They miss us," he said, "and they're very sorry." Gretel nodded. Hansel found her hand, and they held it.